welcome to SlatorPod, episode 13. Good morning to you, Esther.
Morning, Florian.
All right, I spent a lot of time in front of my webcam. I had a virtual conference yesterday, and I'll tell you a bit more about that. So I hope you all had a good and virtual week this week so far. The entire globe is going virtual, is going remote. And of course, for Slater, this is no different. I mean, we've always been a distributed organization, but with schools closing and stay-at-home notices, we're also impacted, and our daily workflow. Well, probably not the workflow, but just at least for me personally, the times I work have changed somewhat, right? Given the school closings, for me in particular, that have affected me. But there's a lot of businesses out there that are affected very severely. For example, here in Switzerland, we have restaurants closing. All non-essential businesses have closed. How is the situation in London regarding closings of stores?
They haven't closed any stores yet. They are stepping up the measures, though, in terms of the recommendations. So the general recommendation is no non-essential contact. Don't go to bars, pubs, clubs. Stay away from people who are over the age of 70.
But they're still open?
Yeah. They technically are, they are still open. I don't know whether some of them will choose to close because they don't have any customers.
Yeah.
We will see. And then news is that schools are closing, last day open today. Though they are remaining open for what you call key workers. So the children of nurses and other frontline staff will be allowed to go to school.
Wow, okay. Yeah, we're probably one step ahead in the timeline here, because everything is closed except basically grocery stores. It's in Switzerland, it's we're very close to Italy, so it's coming up through our southern cantons, and it's but again, this has gone fully global in Europe's affected California today. Shut down, even more strict than much of Europe. So an evolving situation. So what we've done this week, we're not only going to talk about Corona. There's other things.
You'll be pleased to know. Yeah.
Yes, you'd be pleased to know that we're not only going to talk about Corona, but we did do something we'd you should maybe almost classify as a public service announcement. Today we published an article that lists all of the different responses that industry participants, LSPs, have put out and told people what's their plan, what's their contingency plan during this crisis. And so I really encourage everybody to go and check it out. It's very interesting. We probably have about 50 different responses. And this is a living article. We'll keep it open. Unlike all of our other articles where we, obviously don't update midstream. This one we encourage people who want to get this published. They can send us, their notices, their updates to their customers, etc. So when I've read through it, really the talk is about, or what they're stressing is business continuity, right?
Yeah.
So they're saying, we're working remotely even though our facilities are closed. Some have pointed out that they're fully cloud-based, or most of their tech is fully cloud-based, and that basically our services and operational backbone are predominantly cloud-based, so don't worry. Then some have put out resources on how to use telehealth services. That's I think from the virtual interpreting space in the US. And then we spoke about media localization as well. That I think the key problem is the dubbing. Because dubbing is yes, I mean there are remote products like zoos out there, but the vast majority continue to work in studios, and those studios are now shut down. So the dubbers and the media localizers are updating, how this continues. Most of them stress that subtitling continues to go on, and other services, maybe voiceover, but the core dubbing operations are probably put on hold for now. Very challenging situation for everybody. We also published a pro article, and I don't want to go too much into detail because we did discuss it the last couple of times around already, but around the performance of the listed LSPs. Again, the key here is that it's as good as a proxy as any about about how the impact of this crisis on this particular industry is perceived by the investment community, i.e. by kind of almost the public at large, right? So that is the interesting point here, not who fell how or who took what hit on the stock market, but it's important to really track this. And it's somewhat encouraging that the major players like SDL, like RWS, like Appen are actually somewhat above the benchmark index. So it seems that well-capitalized, strong businesses in this industry are perceived as, relative outperformers, or, not, in a sense, the ones that are getting hit most in this current crisis. And I think that's encouraging because, yes, it is a relatively virtual industry already, right? It touches all kinds of other industries. There's a lot of business in pharmaceuticals and other defensive sectors that are likely going to remain somewhat robust during this crisis. So, yeah, it was an interesting. I mean, Appen's doing well. Keywords, of course, in the gaming, and SDL and RWS are kind of on benchmark level there. So only the smaller ones are suffering in terms of the sell-off. I mean, it's a snapshot. It changes day by day. The markets are as volatile as they've been probably ever since the Great Depression in the 20s. This is an unprecedented situation, but yeah. So for our pro subscribers, they can go and look at that chart and graph. On a more positive note, as conferences are moving away or offline, or so from offline to online, I had a fantastic experience yesterday. I was scheduled to keynote the XTM Live conference in California this week, but they did a fantastic job. The XTM team, they moved it online through a GoToMeeting video conference. And, we're familiar with GoToMeeting. We had Hartmut at our Amsterdam conference. So I can now attest that the product works exceptionally well. There were, literally hundreds of participants in that virtual conference. And the XTM team did a fantastic job running it, preparing it. There was no glitches. There was, very smooth handoffs. And the discussions were very, very interesting. So, within that very short period of time, XTM, that translation management solution provider, managed to pull off a virtual conference. And I got to say, I was very encouraged seeing this. And, this is probably something that many more will do going forward as well. So, so that's the quick Corona update. But yeah, as I promised, we're going to talk about other things. So you were looking into the Chartered Institute of Linguists survey that they published in the UK a couple of weeks ago, Esther, right?
Yeah, exactly. The Chartered Institute of Linguists, the CIOL, so it's a UK professional body that also represents translators and interpreters around the world, published the second in a series of surveys focused on looking at qualifications and career paths for linguists. So we had the survey was of 320 participants. And that broadly included translators, interpreters, some students, some retired professionals, some also more business focused people in the language industry, project managers, sales, business development, etc. So it's the second of a 4-part study, this survey. And 70% of the respondents were translators and interpreters.
Oh, wow.
50. So obviously, I mean, that I think is probably reflective of their membership base. And 50% of all respondents were working full-time as translators / interpreters. So that's sort of the makeup of the participants there.
Who was the rest? Sorry, excuse me.
The rest were, so like I said, it's some project managers, some students, some retired professionals, and some from business development roles, admin roles as well.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Yeah. But there were some really interesting insights there and some quite in-depth questions around sentiments towards the industry, how people feel that their role is perceived by non-language professionals as well. But I thought one interesting thing, and something that we picked up in the headline as well, was the feelings towards the level of income. So one related question was actually, at what age did you start getting paid for working as a linguist. And most people said that they were in a paid role by the age of 30. So at least 65% of people surveyed had actually started working for paid work by the age of 30, which might not be that surprising, although obviously some people do have other careers before deciding to become a linguist. And so, I mean, the question of income really was phrased, I think, as at what age should you start to earn an acceptable income, or what you consider to be an acceptable income. And really, it wasn't until, generally speaking, it wasn't until early 30s, so between the age of 31 and 35, that people started to earn, or they reported that they started to earn what they considered to be an acceptable level of income. So 36% of people said it was in their early 30s. However, 1/5 or 20% of people said that they had not yet started to receive what they considered to be an acceptable income. Obviously, there were some students in there, so they would probably fall into that bracket, I would imagine. But I mean, there were no quantitative questions either about, what is an acceptable amount, probably because you are actually surveying people in different geographies as well. But I mean, the sort of analysis from the CIOL was that this showed a significant level of dissatisfaction in terms of interpreters and translators' pay. I mean, on a slightly happier note, I would say, one of the questions focused around what of the following statements best reflects your feelings about being a linguist.
That one's nice.
In spite of the pay, how do you actually feel about the role and being a linguist? I mean, now that I think there were 5 or so categories to choose from in this one, but the 2 biggest responses, the 2 categories that received the most responses were, so over 40% of people said it's a profession and linguists should be respected and like other professionals, which, I mean, you can't really argue with that. But the second highest response category was, I feel like it will be a lifelong passion for me. So 30% of people said they feel like being a linguist will be a lifelong passion.
See, I would be very interested to see how many, like if you take other job categories, right? I don't know. Like, nothing against accountants, but do accountants have a lifelong passion for accounting? Or I mean, there's just like a million other jobs that you probably wouldn't get 30% of the people who say they have actually a passion for this, right?
Yeah. I mean, most of it's a pretty positive sentiment, obviously, and some of the other categories were also things like, I care about the languages profession, I want to improve the sector, I want to make a difference and break down language barriers. So these are things that people are actually saying as to why are you in this role, or what do you like about this role? And something less than 1% said it's just a job.
All right.
I suppose it stands to reason, though. I mean, if you're not satisfied with the pay and you only consider it just a job, you're not really going to stay in the profession, are you?
Yeah, that there's some self-selection going on, I guess.
Exactly.
Because if you don't care and you don't like to pay, I guess you should abandon it at some point if you're not that happy with it, right?
Exactly.
Hey, and then you came across a tweet segueing from that, from our friends at Zingword.
That's right.
They're doing repeating tweets and polls around, those were for translators, right?
Translators and interpreters,
Okay.
yeah. So the one I came across was a tweet from Zingword saying, looking to survey or take a quick poll really of translators and interpreters, asking how has coronavirus affected your business. So I mean, they had something like 90 votes when I looked at this, and about 50% had said that business was slow. 40% said business has not changed, and about 10% or just under said business is better.
Okay.
So,
yeah, we had something similar in we've asked in our newsletter. We've also ran the same poll twice over the last 2 weeks, and the results were, I don't know, maybe there's also self-selection. A fair amount of people said it was better. And then very few said it was severely negatively impacting. And I'm sorry that we're going back to Corona, but I guess it's hard to avoid, right? But you never. These are quick snapshots. These are not representative polls. So I wonder if those who are really heavily impacted are maybe not clicking as much as those who actually feel a short-term bump in their business. So
yeah.
But I mean, so this tweet where you Yeah, so 50% said business is slow is probably somewhat accurate. Only 9% business is better. Yeah.
I mean, there were a couple of comments underneath as well, which I think were quite interesting. I mean, somebody made the point that translators and interpreters may well have a different response. But then I think they then said, well, yes, but a lot of translators work as interpreters, so does it really make sense to split the poll into two different polls?
No.
One person then also said all interpreting orders have been cancelled, some translation orders have been suspended, companies are trying to save money.
Yeah, I mean, So this goes back to the broader question, like the impact on overall demand. And this is somewhat, it's probably correlating fairly accurately with the economy at large, which obviously is taking a major hit right now. But for conference interpreters, I mean, I would assume there's zero business. If you're in a lockdown mode, there's no conferences, there's no business meetings. I mean, what are you going to do? So
work as a translator, no?
Yeah, you can work as but many of the professional conference interpreters, they probably don't work as translators. I mean, that's not their business.
I suppose if you're used to working 100% of the time on that,
on the interpreting side, it's different. So now I think very many governments around the world are keenly aware that you need to support these types of professions and professionals that have, that basically whose business has gone down to zero. I mean, interpreters are one group, and there are many others. And for example, here in Switzerland, they're now discussing, literally $30-40 billion aid packages to the broader economy. And then part of this is I just read a couple of hours ago that, yes, I mean, these independent professionals are part of it, and hopefully they'll get some support to, enable to that they can generate some income over the next couple of weeks. Okay, getting out of Corona again into Airbnb, whose business is likely also impacted by that current situation. They're not listed yet. I think they're still a private company. Yeah, because Uber listed. But Airbnb is still a private company. So, well, anyway, that said, they have a ton of localization. So we had a very unique opportunity to interview Salvo Giamaresi, their head of localization. So what were your main takeaway from this, Esther?
Yeah, I suppose it was the sheer volume. I mean, we're used to, hearing about large volumes in the region of sort of 30 million words or something as an annual sort of volume. But this is 100 million plus words translated in 2019, human translated in 2019. And that was for product marketing help center and communication documentation. So that's not even counting the user generated content, the descriptions of people's homes and the descriptions of experiences that are on offer. So it's huge, and they've doubled. They doubled, I think, the number of language combinations to 62 during the course of 2019. So there's now 62 languages that you can use to engage with Airbnb, which, so the 100 million. And also, I believe they're only using one LSP. So they're working with an LSP called Translated for translation, transcreation, and cultural adaptation. Mm-hmm. Plus, they are also using one QA vendor for the functional and linguistic testing.
Okay. So that's Translated. That's the MateCat, Modern MT, also related, right? Yeah, Italy and Rome, right? They're based in Rome.
Yeah.
Wow, they get to translate 100 million words. Maybe they have some backup vendors, but yeah, that's a nice piece of business. And also,
that's a nice piece of business. Yeah.
You said 62 languages. That is an amazing amount of languages, because just sourcing a good roster of linguists. I mean, you and I were in those positions before, right? We had to source linguists for that many languages. That's a major, major challenge. Vetting them, making sure they're all available when you need them. Wow. Okay.
And then for the user generated piece as well, but they said they have a translate button for reviews and for user generated content that then pushes it out to a third party machine translation provider.
Okay.
So you can then see those in the language of your choice at the click of a button.
Maybe Modern MT, but we don't know. Do we know? We don't know.
I don't believe we know. No.
Okay. Before we segue into the next one, speaking of MT, DeepL just launched Japanese and Chinese finally after about 2 years of asking or a push from users. They launched and did one of those posts where they said they beat everybody else, Google Translate, Amazon, in terms of the benchmark. People prefer DeepL, but let's see, right? But if DeepL launches finally into a language other than the core they had their Lingui database in, it's kind of proof that they can ramp up their model in other languages as well. And Japanese and Chinese are obviously huge globally. So that might mean that they finally enter the US or even the Asian markets. Just kind of read this in our Slater Sweep this morning. You remember Slater Sweep is our our daily news roundup where we basically, whatever we come across, we stick it into a newsletter and send it out every day. So for paying subscribers. And hey, podcasting, let's do the full introspection here. So podcasting is going multilingual.
Yeah, we're getting meta, I suppose.
We're getting meta. Yeah, that's right.
Podcasting about podcasting. So this was a story earlier this week about podcasts becoming more of a multilingual business, and we were also sort of inspired by a blog post in one of I think Harvard, on a blog post by Harvard that was talking about that being a boom in translation for podcasts. So the idea being obviously that podcasts are reliant on audiences. Obviously revenues can come from advertising, content marketing, subscriptions, etc. But all of that is dependent on the audience size. Therefore, expanding into more languages, is likely to boost that audience if you do it right. And podcasts generally, I think, have just crossed the $1 billion mark in terms of market size. So it's now becoming quite a big business, and it's growing, I think, exponentially.
We should be reading ads. We should be reading ads as well. Well, let's see.
I think we should do a jingle, no?
Huh? We should jingle?
No,
yeah, jingle. Okay. No, but I mean, I guess the way all of these podcasts are making money is they're reading ads, right? So if anybody listens to this and wants to do an ad on SlatorPod, please reach out.
A nice little banner behind us.
Another banner. A banner as well, but we'll talk about it.
Anyway, the story is that some of the big US publishers of podcasts, I think Wondery and iHeartMedia are two of them. They've both announced that they're going to be doing podcasts in languages other than English. So a lot of these seem to be the kind of fiction and sort of series. So you've got Dr. Death from Wondery, which is available, I think, in about 6 or 7 languages, including English, and a podcast called The Nobody Zone, which is a true crime series, which actually, when it was first brought out, it was immediately available in 5 languages. So I suppose people generally now are cottoning on to the idea that this might make sense, and particularly when you consider the idea or the fact of listening to podcasts around the world is becoming more. I mean, it's becoming more of a thing, more of a pastime. I think we mentioned specifically South America and India as places where podcasting or listening to podcasts is becoming bigger business.
So hang on, they actually, they revoice it, right? They're not just give subtitles. They revoice the entire podcast in another language.
It's effectively a different podcast. They're translating it and then they're revoicing it.
Wow.
So re-recording it with in the languages required.
That is a very unusual text type if you think of it from a translator perspective.
Yeah.
If it maybe not a true crime, but like an actual conversational podcast, that's a very interesting.
It would depend on the content, wouldn't it? If it is true crime, then it's basically just a novel.
Yeah, it's a novel, but like a conversational podcast like ours would be very interesting to translate. All right.
Maybe we should do it.
Maybe we should do it. If anybody should, we should. No, I think we have in the language industry, there's a lot of English speakers, of course, because it's the pivot language. So great. Well, that's it from us this week. Thanks so much for tuning in again. Stay healthy, stay safe, and looking forward to doing this again next week. Bye, Esther.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.